broadcasting from the Unshackled Studios in Melbourne. This is Wilmsfront, brought to you by theunshackled.net. Now here's Tim Wilms.
Hello everyone and welcome to tonight's show. The date is Friday the 17th of January 2020. It is just past 7 p.m. here in Melbourne. We are live on the Tim Wilms YouTube channel. I've put the entropy link in the YouTube live chat, and of course we are also live on the Tim Wilms D Live channel. Now, most of the bushfires this summer have been downgraded to advice level. We've received some much needed rain in this past week. There is an evacuation warning for the northwest of Victoria for Buffalo Creek, Buffalo River, Morang South, Miriang and Nung. The toxicity and blame game for the bushfires on social media and in the mainstream media, with leftist spammers, as I call them, doing their utmost to blame climate change, Scott Morrison and Rupert Murdoch for them, and to shout down anyone who puts forth a more scientific and evidence-based point of view. One of those who's been fighting against the spammers and the online mobs on Twitter has been Alexandra Marshall, who joins me in the studio.
Lovely to be here this evening.
Now, unlike most on Twitter, you actually are quite knowledgeable about, well, not just bushfires, but land management, which is the key to preventing the majority of bushfires. And so you've grown up on, you're a generational farmer on the New South Wales Mid North Coast.
Yeah, so we hail from Mid North Coast, and our family have been farming that area since around the 1830s, so pretty close to when it was settled originally. And I think they went there for gold and then discovered that there was no gold, which was a bit of a letdown. But they ended up doing dairy farms and cattle farms, and of course, bordering all of the farms is bushland, all the way down. And they learned how to deal with the bush from the Aboriginal tribes that lived in the area. And so that meant in order to maintain and keep a hold of the huge raging bushfires, they would burn it off every winter to keep it down in a shrub-like level bush. And that went on for most of the history of the Mid North Coast. It was regularly burnt. And only in the last 30 years, the practices of how the bush is managed, and how it's handled by councils and how it's thought about by people in general has changed dramatically, I would say.
I think a lot of Australians don't appreciate just how tough the Australian land is. The farmers, European farmers, when they settled here, you mentioned they learned
it tries to kill us all the time.
Yes.
Even when we moved there, we got faced with a drought, and then we had a bushfire, and then of course we had 2 floods, and that was within the first year. So it's always trying to kill you, and they found that was the same thing. But the bush itself is very hardy, and what I think is difficult for environmentalists today to understand is that it has to burn, and that it will burn. So you can't lock up the bush. One way or another, it's going to burn. All you can do is control when it burns and how hot it's actually going to burn.
Well, farmers, not just your family, but others who've been there for generations, they learnt very quickly how to manage the land. But as the state and federal governments and bureaucracies were infiltrated by environmental policy and big government, they basically have said that they know better than the farmers, and there's been a lot of restrictions on...
We call it a disconnect between Canberra and the rural landholders. So if you live on the land or near the land, you generally have learned by experience. You don't get many second chances. If you don't manage land correctly, you get wiped out pretty fast. And the experts from Canberra, they often come into the bush and try and tell people who've been living there forever how to manage the bush. But of course they come from a city, and they don't understand that it's a different sort of a creature. You can't leave it sit and hope that it'll all be nice and green. And even an example would be the animals can't get into the bush. So we have kangaroos and all sorts of bird life on our property now because it's no good in the bush. It's too thick. They can't get into it. They can't eat. There's no food. So you have to manage the bush as well for the animals, not just for your farms.
Yes, we've seen those numerous videos online of those thirsty koalas, which it's so cute that, well, as humans we're able to hydrate them, but you just think that there's been 1 billion animals that have died this bushfire season, and I've said before, we're sort of falling in love with the koala all over again, the fact that they just are so vulnerable to that.
I think that's why rural Australians are so angry with what's happened. It's because so many animals have died from terrible park management. It's not just the fires themselves, they can't get out anymore. So a lot of green policy, particularly on Kangaroo Island, required the fencing off of property so that your cattle and animals couldn't wander in the bush anymore. Well, that meant that when everything tried to flee, it couldn't flee anymore, which it used to. So some of the fencing for environmental causes is an example of a change of behaviour that's really had a detrimental effect on the movement of wildlife. But also, it's not just the animals, it's the wildlife itself. As I was telling you earlier before the show, we were world renowned for our wildflowers, and they used to grow on all the short heathen near the beach, and it used to be burnt every year. And we export them to Japan. It's an amazing market of Christmas bells. They're like these orange things with little yellow tips, and like they're beautiful. They're almost unheard of now because they can't survive in the thick brush that's grown up and suffocated all the wildflower fields.
It's not
that's
just,
only 30 years
yeah.
of poor management that's killed them.
It's just not the animals of Australia that are such unique creatures, but we've got so much great horticulture here, our beautiful, well, both flora and fauna. We're so lucky that there's so much unique to this continent.
And it needs fire. It doesn't like being locked up. It doesn't like really, really hot fires either. So the sort of fires we're seeing now they're very intense. They tend to kill everything.
Now, I first came across you on Twitter. You were interacting with Marcus Fu, who I've been following and interacting with him for a while. He's only I think 20 years old.
Yeah, he's a bit younger than us, but he knows an awful lot about party politics.
Yes, he's amassed over 4,000 Twitter followers. You've got 6.8k followers.
Is that what we're up to now? That's a lot.
But yes, Marcus, he's an Australian of Chinese Malaysian heritage.
And New Zealand. Yeah, he came via New Zealand.
But he's full-on patriot, and he's also a gay conservative, which, as we tragically saw in the past week, doesn't protect you from the online
the Twitter
social media mob. And I know that I've seen Marcus been accused of, well, not just being a homophobe himself, but also a race traitor as well, which I would say accusing somebody of that's racism in itself.
Oh, I get referred to the colour of my skin more than my name on Twitter, just because I'm obviously of European descent. But Marcus, because he's a gay conservative, he gets a fair bit of flack on Twitter. I'm a woman, so I get the feminists come after me more often than not. So...
And they're the ones that complain about abuse. I saw, was it Jane Caro and Sally Rugg? They complained about all the abusive messages they got.
She's also very dull. I have to say that Jane Caro comes up with tweets that are not interesting enough to be abusive anyway. That's her main problem. She's not interesting.
Well, but she's also wrong. That's the thing.
Well, and wrong.
And she also is a regular on Q&A and the sort of lefty
tax
circle.
dollars at work.
But you've also appeared in mainstream media. When I was researching a bit more about you, you've got your own blog, and you've also written for the Spectator and Penthouse.
Yeah, got a few more articles coming out this week.
And also becoming a regular contributor to Sky News
Fingers
programs.
Crossed. Yeah, that was sort of accidental. This time last year, I was just on Twitter talking rubbish about politics and getting interested in... Basically, free speech is why I got into politics. Because as a writer, as soon as they started saying, you can't write this and you can't write that because you've got the wrong skin colour or you've got the wrong religion, it was a bit of a shock. I thought we had these discussions about freedom of speech and the Open Writing Forum a long time ago, like several hundred years ago, but we're back right where we started. And that's why I started getting involved in Twitter and in commentating. And But I've been around Twitter for a long time.
Yes,
like,
I
a
saw
long
that
time.
you'd been on it since
2009.
yeah, which is when it started to break out into the mainstream, and we're roughly the same age, and so we've seen Twitter slowly become this global political forum, and it's got to the stage, especially with this bushfire season, we've seen disinformation, as I call it, mass spamming to make it seem like that the Australian people want to overthrow Scott Morrison, and basically an attempt to try and distort our democracy. That on top of all of the abuse and trolling of people, which we just talked about before, can have tragic consequences.
There's a couple of things to remember about Twitter. I've been on it. I'm only slightly politics. Most of what I do is science fiction. So most of my days of Twitter in the early years are all about sci-fi. And I've watched fandom wars and, people have all these meltdowns many times before. It's not new to politics, this sort of hounding and Twitter groups coming at you. That's not a quirk of Australian politics. That's a quirk of Twitter itself.
Oh, I'm just using
that's what Twitter does. People in the media seem to think it's because of politics or because of the new climate change line that's being run. It's not. It's just how people behave in groups. Yes, and also you talked about how the split of Twitter is sort of moving the discussion with politicians. What people say on Twitter is real. They're real people. They're real thoughts. But it's heavily slanted toward the left because left-leaning people tend to use social media. But recently, more people from the right or from the centre have joined, and that's sort of spun the left of Twitter into a bit of a frenetic fit. So you're seeing what's basically a swarming effect because they're panicking. It's actually a good sign that Twitter's like new hashtags every couple of hours. That's them fighting back against a bit of pushback from the other side of the discussion.
And when they panic, they get more incoherent, inconsistent, and then worse
at spelling. Have you seen their trending hashtags are not actually spelt correctly?
And you can't correct on Twitter, because I don't use Twitter that much, basically because it's not like Facebook where there's more structure to it, where someone makes a post, there's Facebook comments. I actually prefer it that there's comments underneath there. And there's obviously Facebook groups. The conversation is more structured.
It's more like a live journal
style. And controlled.
Yeah.
While Twitter, somebody posts something, there's replies. The replies can get retweeted, and anyone can respond to anybody. It's all public. There's no such thing. Well, you can protect your tweets, but then somebody can leak out your protected tweets.
Yeah, Twitter's more like a conversation at a bar. It's not meant to be an essay competition, right? Twitter is a conversation. Whereas Facebook, people tend to get into graph wars and, when they post the same graph over and over again to make a point, and then you get essays attached to those graphs. And I think Twitter's a pretty good forum as far as getting a discussion started, a discourse started. You're probably not going to solve problems on Twitter, but at least you can raise problems. It's like a notice board or a radio.
I've seen essays begin to emerge on Twitter, which they've got the tweet thread now, which they can be from about 3 to 20. And
when people post the thread, I rarely do you do that because it's you lose track of the Twitter threads. That's when you have like one and then the next one and then
I think that that sort of what's a word for it? Feature was promoted by Donald Trump when he's announcing policies, and it's through multiple tweets.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, it's sort of not what the platform's designed for, but yeah.
And if people are being abusive to you, there is the block button.
Yeah, so I don't block. You've noticed I don't block a lot of people. The only people I block on Twitter are predators, and that I don't mean like a predator in the normal sense. I mean accounts set up designed to get other people removed from the platform, and they roam around in packs and they report you for not doing anything. They just report in the hope they can get you removed. They're the ones that I block.
So there's been a lot of talk about troll farms and Twitter bots. Are they actually real, or are they just people working frantically to set up these?
So bots are real. You would have seen them during the Hong Kong protests. The most bots we had were a lot of Chinese bots, and there's no followers. They don't follow anybody else. They've usually got lots of number characters after their names, and they're only tweeting tiny fragments of text, and they're brand new. That's a bot. and they're auto-generated for discussion. Then you get trolls, and they're real people, but they're just being annoying or nasty, but they're usually real people.
And you have to remember that this is just people behind a keyboard.
Yeah, you can turn it off. If it gets too much for you, just turn your phone off and go and take a break.
And the vast majority of these people, they'd never say that in real life. Perhaps some of them would, but in terms of, because there's also a lot of threats that are made on social media, but it's, at the end of the day, they're all cowards hiding.
Well, at the end of the day, it's a public forum. These people exist in the real world. They think these things in the real world. But the beauty of social media is you can block them, you can report them, and you can turn it off. It shouldn't... I've had people come after me regularly. If it gets too much, just mute them. You don't have to interact with everybody that you come across. Try and do it if it's beneficial and not get caught up in the storm of Twitter, if that makes any sense.
Well, the reason I wanted to have you on tonight is not just to discuss Twitter, though we decided that this was going to be a two-part. We'd talk about some of the actual reason why we have had this record bushfire season, which it's mainly ravaged your home state of New South Wales.
We had 3 weeks of nothing but thick smoke and fires. So yeah.
Well, we've had that in Melbourne last few days, coming from East Gippsland. That was over Melbourne. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then we got the rain on Wednesday afternoon, and on Thursday you got that in New South Wales.
Yes, we got caught in the rain. We finally had a day of rain.
A blissful summer rain.
Yes, so that was our first rain. We've had nothing for months and months and months.
So there's been 18 million hectares burned nationwide. 5.2 million has been burnt in New South Wales, which is basically a third, and 20 of the 29 deaths from the bushfires have been in New South Wales. Over 2.1 thousand homes have been destroyed in New South Wales. It's been over 2,600 in total, so it's mainly been in New South Wales. And there's obviously been, as I mentioned, the left, they just say it's climate change because it's basically easy to just blame something in the sky.
Yeah, it's the convenient get out of jail free card to sort of absolve you of all your policy mismanagement over the years.
Oh, well, it's also opportunistic as well, because even when it rains and there's lightning strikes, they say that's climate change as well, because they say that it used to be global warming, but now it's climate change. They say extreme weather.
Global cooling, global warming, climate change, climate crisis, I don't know what they're up to now. They keep changing.
I had... at the end of last year, Stephen Wells, who wrote the book Confessions of a Climate Denier, and I asked him, is there any basis to this extreme weather hypothesis? And he said no, because basically it's carbon dioxide in the atmosphere causes heat. How can that manipulate the weather like that? It just causes heat.
Well, we're a 4.5 odd billion-year-old planet, and we're coming out of an ice age, and Australia's weather's far more complicated than a global temperature mean. We have monsoons, we've lost mountain ranges, we're drifting. We've got lots of big problems for Australia, and we also have 100-year cyclic droughts and floods, which our grandparents remember, but nobody in living memory remembers.
And there's also...
That's really important to remember, because I always quote, I've never seen it this bad. No, you haven't, because it's a 100-year turnabout. So we've been on the same property for several hundred years, and we know the drought and flood cycles. They are regular. They happen.
I've coined the term goldfish memory syndrome, where basically everyone forgets what happens 5 months ago, let alone 5 years ago.
It's 5 minutes on the internet.
Yeah, well, so they're not going to remember what happened 100 years ago. That's obviously been passed down generations to generations in your family. And I know that there's this...
House is built on stilts for a reason.
I know that there's this hashtag OK Boomer, but they actually lived through the 50s, 60s and 70s. They can tell you stories of dark times, of bushfires, and even when people are still dying of heat stroke, which is unheard of these days.
I don't know if you saw it, but I found the letters of my great whatever grandfather from the Federation drought. And that's when they had a terrible I think it was 15 years of drought, and that was probably the worst drought Australia's ever seen. And that information isn't being taught, it seems to be lost. But we've had terrible times, we just forget about them. It's almost like they didn't happen, if that makes sense.
Because even though everyone says...
They start their Bureau of Meteorology statistics far too early. So...
and everyone says everything's on the internet's forever, but there's a lot of information that is only available online if it happened after 1995, when the internet was first created. There's a lot of old newspaper columns which have never been published online, or unless you take out one of those Nexus subscriptions which cost thousands of dollars.
A lot of knowledge used to come from came from my grandparents and their parents. It's not coming from online or from newspapers. It's passed down information, and as people move away from the land, which is one of the concerns happening at the moment with the drought, families that have been on the land for a long time are moving away, and so that knowledge they had of the weather and the climate is going, and that you won't be able to dig that back up again because it's just not recorded.
Speaking of goldfish memory syndrome, people have forgotten that in the last few months of last year, that's when southern New South Wales was most affected by the drought, which a big contributing factor to it was the mismanagement of the Murray-Darling Basin through the Murray-Darling Basin Authority and Murray-Darling Basin Plan. That's another factor why generations of farmers are now leaving the land.
And dams in general. You're not allowed to dig out your dams. You're not allowed to build new ones. Or you can try, but it's going to take council a very long time to approve them, because councils are very green and they're very slow moving. And by the time you've approved something, there's no more rain. So it's always a struggle against these green leaning councils to get any approval for just water management or, clearing, all of it.
And there's also the land clearing laws and regulations, because I know that the social media spammers have said, the Greens hardly have any seats at a state and federal level.
But they are married to the Labor Party, so it's the Unions, Greens and Labor in the middle, and so they draft their policies accordingly. So the Greens don't have to hold power to hold sway.
And also the Liberal National Government that's been in charge in New South Wales since 2011, they're been very eager to placate the Greens and environmentalists.
Well, both governments have looked at the swarm on social media and thought that that's an accurate reflection of everybody in Australia, which it's of course not. And they think there's political mileage to be had out of the green approach to climate change. And every election they've had so far has said to them, no, you're actually incorrect. That's not what the general public is saying. But doesn't mean it doesn't affect policy, because it is.
And people also don't realise that the government, they're basically managing the country and also managing their media and PR strategy. It's the bureaucracy most of the time that runs the country. There's
a bit too much politicking and not enough actual solving of problems. That's one of the things that is frustrating rural Australia, particularly with the Nationals and with Scott Morrison, is there's so much effort placed on how do they look and reacting to situations, not about them going out, looking at a situation and actually finding their own solutions or listening to the people going, you need to help us here. That's why we loved the Army coming in, because they're very organised. They're good at making decisions, and they've been doing an absolutely amazing job. But we had to beg for that to happen. Beg for the Army to arrive. There was nothing better than when we saw the planes come in over us. We thought, finally, we've got a little bit of structure and some help.
And that's the most legitimate criticism you can make of Scott Morrison and his media strategy and government during this bushfire season, is that they've been trying to manage it from a optics perspective rather than actually not just being on the ground, but their heads down looking at actual practical policies.
It's the old look after the pennies and the pounds will sort themselves out. It's like that with politics. If they were more focused on looking after the individual towns that needed help and the services that needed help, then the PR image of themselves would improve. They wouldn't have to worry about it. But at the moment, they're starting at the PR image and working their way back down, and that doesn't work.
And you can tell that Scott Morrison, he's been rattled by the social media mob, because then there was...
That's legitimate.
Yeah, there was the Hawaiian holiday in mid-December, and the Canberra Press Gallery now, they've basically adopted the paparazzi strategy now, and so they had the snapparazzi in Hawaii of him by the beachside.
They're vultures at the best of times. But there was a genuine criticism amongst a lot of conservatives, particularly in rural Australia, who watched him leave on a trip and went, I'm not sure I would have done that. And so they gave the left-wing press an in to then start absolutely devouring and spinning it way out of proportion. But there was the crack made from their own behaviour that was left there.
At the beginning, Scott Morrison said there's limited role for the federal government, and then he said, this is such a unprecedented national bushfire disaster that there needs to be a greater role for the federal government. And it just looked like he was playing catch up the whole time. And there were many Canberra press gallery journalists such as Peter Van Onselen and Samantha Maiden who were only too eager to amplify every inconsistency, every slip up that he made. And of course, there were those awkward scenes where he was in Cobra in southern New South Wales with
that wasn't a great idea.
The forced handshake, where that wasn't the only forced handshake. There was one the next day as well. And it just
this is
so
what we
terrible.
come to with empathy and leadership. When you're suffering and you're a town or a person and you've had a terrible hardship, the last thing you want to see of any politician is a Canberra press convoy arriving ahead of supplies, ahead of food. You don't want to see the limousines arrive, basically, as the turn of phrase goes. And so it's a mistake to try and get PR mileage out of these towns before you've helped them. Help them first, and then, after all the dust and ash are settled, then start having a chat about what happened. But it's leadership that we're missing. He's not making leadership choices of his own accord. He's being backed into corners, often by social media.
It's not Scott Morrison himself. This is the whole modern political system.
All political evil. The same thing is true of the left. There's no difference.
And
Albanese would have the same problem.
And because he's an opposition leader, he hasn't had to. He can't make any decisions.
He doesn't have the attention. No.
And so all he just has to do is display his own empathy and have a few policies here and there,
which is easy to do from the sidelines.
And we've seen the news poll this week where Labor is now ahead in the two-party preferred, but Labor was ahead there.
I thought we decided that news polls were no longer a thing or useful or in any way, shape and form accurate.
As I said, goldfish memory. We've forgotten about that now.
They don't work.
We're back to poll crunching again. But the 22-point drop in Scott Morrison's personal approval, and it was Andrew Connell at Sky News who said he hasn't gone down in terms versus elbow. It's an empty chair.
Well, yeah, I think the only thing they can do really to improve their image is to just start doing a better actual job. It's not, there's no real politics in there that's wrong. It's, in this kind of crisis time, it's how do you solve a problem? That's what needs to be looked at. It's not policy, it's actual practical application at this point in time.
And we should give credit to our emergency personnel, the volunteer firefighters, because I remember Black Saturday in Victoria in 2009, 173 people died in those fires. And obviously every death is a tragedy, but the death toll has been kept at 29. There's been more buildings that have been destroyed, but less homes have been destroyed than in Black Saturday. And so there's been some lessons that have been learned. There's been obviously more efficiencies in emergency warnings, but there is always way more that we can do.
There was a big Royal Commission into those bushfires. There was also a Royal Commission into the Eastern Seaboard fires, which is what I remember when I was a child, when Sydney got surrounded by fires, and a lot of things were changed and practices were adopted after those. My fear is the type of Royal Commission that's been ordered in this case doesn't seem to be into how the fires were fought or, any shortcomings that were there, because there's always things you can improve in that sort of situation. It seems to be purely based upon, is climate change causing fires? Which is a real worry because, for example, the road management was absolutely terrible in this bushfire season. So we were travelling up north to the freeway to get home. 16 hours we were left sleeping by the side of the road on a fire front, which is extremely dangerous, and there was no information, no knowledge. We got our advice from truck drivers, And that shouldn't be the case. Obviously, in a 21st century world like this, we shouldn't be relying on hearsay to get around giant fire fronts.
I saw
that's not good.
the video footage of the clogged highways. I just assumed that, there's a lot of people obviously trying to get out. But
at Nabiac, there were 2 rural fire people on the road directing traffic straight into Foster, which was also surrounded by fires, without asking you, do you actually want to end up in Foster, or would you like to go around and try, getting across the mountains the other way? So, and there was just no information at all that you could find online. Nothing. So
I know that after Black Saturday, that's when Victorian government implemented the emergency text message warnings.
They also combined different resources, and because they had equipment that they couldn't talk to each other and things like that. So they did a few upgrades like that.
I definitely feel that, because Victoria has, as I said at the beginning of the show, there's another catastrophic bushfire warning, even though I'm sure you're the same. Daniel Andrews, he's wasted a lot of money. He's got a lot of dud policies and projects.
I try and ignore his existence, to be fair.
But he has done a good job managing the bushfire recovery and response.
As much as I dislike Daniel Andrews, he did 2 things correctly. He called for the army immediately, which was the correct thing to do, and I think he wants to have more spending on, I think it's water bombers and traditional fleet, because the federal government is responsible for the fleet, and the states borrow from it. And so if the states are asking the federal government to get more of fleet together, that's exactly what they should be doing, because there's not enough high quality, large air bombers.
And this was one of the legitimate points the lefties on social media were making, that Bill Shorten had one of his better election policies.
One of the only things he did right
was to put in
a very small list of correct things that Shorten did.
Put in a greater order for aerial water bombers, which now Scott Morrison has basically adopted that policy.
Yeah, but too late. We've known this is coming for a long time. So we changed our policies for the bush. We locked up the parks. You can't get down the fire trails. You let it sit for 30 years. And then, of course, no improved fleet. I mean, this is what happens. Everyone's been worried about it for a long time. It's not a surprise.
A lot of the debate on Twitter and elsewhere has been because the left have tried to make it all about climate change, but there have been instances of arson, and New South Wales Police, they confirmed that there'd been 183 people charged for starting fires. That's not deliberately starting fires, we should preface. That is just people starting fires a lot of the time through negligence. There were 24 people arrested for arson, deliberately lighting fires, which...
We have real arsonists up our way. Actual arrested a 12, a 13-year-old and a 14-year-old girls who were running around lighting fires just because they could. And I think they were arrested multiple times, and they eventually got a big one going. So of our fires, one was lightning and the other one was arson. So it is a real problem, and you can watch them. If you have your RFS map open and the news broadcaster comes out and says, it's going to be catastrophic fire danger, you can watch the fires pop up all the way along the highway and all the way along the fire tracks. It's just, there is a big problem out there. We need to look at who these people are and why they do it, and what our punishments are for that.
Yeah, exactly. Because, I know in Victoria how a lot of our courts, especially, we've had the African youth gang crime problem here, and there's been a lot of community disharmony that the sentences do not fit the punishment in terms of, it's just basic crime and punishment. It's not just to protect the community, it's to have a deterrent as well. And this needs to happen because arsonists, they can destroy communities.
Well, I think at the very least, I saw New South Wales has increased the fine quite significantly for throwing out cigarette butts from your car. But arson is not treated seriously, especially with kids. They just let go. There needs to be a longer or a more serious punishment for something that can kill people and does kill people and destroys lives. So,
That increased penalty for throwing cigarettes butts out, that was announced by the Emergency Services Minister in New South Wales, David Elliott, who...
Yeah, I was not quite online when I saw it come through. I just sort of scanned through it.
Yeah, we should also make sure that he is criticised as well for actually going on overseas holiday to Europe when Gladys Berejiklian, the Premier, I mean, she let him go on holidays as well.
She's got lots of problems.
when she announced the state of emergency, let the Emergency Services Minister go overseas.
It's an unusual choice of management of your departments if your emergency ministers are going on holidays in an emergency.
I mean, I could keep going on about David Elliott. He's the one that defended police strip searching children, but based on his conduct this summer, he should resign.
Yeah. But I mean, you were talking more about how we can even have these discussions. Like, we can have a discussion here, but plenty of people online want to talk about what's actually caused their fires, what's going on, and now the left are taking over the debate so that you can't even have the discussions anymore. And the politicians are also trying to do the same thing, saying there's no more discussion on what these fires are and what's happened. It's like Australia's not even open for a conversation anymore or any real experience of what's happened.
I noticed that, and I've given them credit on a previous show, BuzzFeed, we used to call them the trash of the internet, but since they got rid of the trash, they had their downsizing, they've actually been doing some good journalism, and their reporters have done a great job separating the fact from the fiction of images and facts about the bushfires online, which I think has been really helpful.
Well, there's some things as well. Like, some things are true that fires are started by lightning strikes. Yes, they are, absolutely. But how we manage the fires has changed. So I was telling you before, they used to fly out and put out bushfires that started in remote areas in summer because they knew they were dangerous. Now they have asset protection as their main goal, so they will wait till a fire approaches housing areas before they go and put it out, if it's in remote areas. And that means you get firestorms building if you've got a couple of ridges on fire. So that happened to us back the ridges there. They were burning for a couple of weeks with no attention. And of course, they eventually became a firestorm and worked their way down the ridge straight toward all the towns. And then it was a disaster. But they could have been put out much earlier.
So, and you only just told me this just before. I was quite shocked. So you could have actually, when the lightning strikes happened, they knew that the fire started. But
yeah, traditionally,
why did they not put them out?
Well, helicopters are expensive. So before, they would go and send the helicopters in and try and put out the fire when it's tiny, because that's what the Royal Commission of Victoria says as well, that you should always put out these fires when they are small if they start at a very bad time of the year, because once they get going, it's too late to try and use it for asset protection. It's too hard to put them out. So yeah,
we'd hope that is something that would legitimately come out in the Royal Commission, because
but it's come out once already. Like, we're literally doing commissions into the same thing with the same problems.
It seems to me that Royal Commissions, they've either been used by governments to investigate their political enemies, like the Pink Bats one and the Trade Union Royal Commission. They may have been investigating legitimate union corruption or government incompetence, but they were still aimed at their political opponents. Or it's always a reactionary, basically, break glass in case of emergency.
It's more to keep the press quiet and to keep the politics under control. If you're having a Royal Commission, it should be, do you know what the problem is? Yes. Well, then you don't need a Royal Commission. If you genuinely don't know what's gone wrong, that's when you would call a Royal Commission. But of late, they're calling them in order to take the heat off the political debate. And that's not why you should call a Royal Commission. So,
and as we saw with the Banking Royal Commission, it's the commission hearings itself, it was basically just a public airing of all the bank's crimes, and basically they're taking advantage of customers. But the actual findings actually recommended the wrong thing, which was to basically squeeze out the mortgage brokers.
Well, that's the other problem. Like, if you get a Royal Commission that tells you, well, this is the fear right now. If you start a Royal Commission from a political standpoint with a political outcome, well, then all this Royal Commission will do into the bushfires, if it's a climate change only, then it's probably just going to raise taxes. It'll be an excuse to change the taxation levies on Australians, to change what you can and can't do with your land. That's what it'll come to, instead of a genuine commission, a Royal Commission into the handling of the fire. And there there are real concerns, particularly with the app and the information coming out of the app. With as I said, the traffic management was poor. The asset, did we have enough fleets like for the fire bombers? These are real important points, but they're not going to be looked at. So,
well, I have a
we have
bad enough
problem.
experience with the MyGov app, where you interact with the tax office and Medicare. That is an absolute nightmare.
Don't get me started on government apps. It's all I do all day. It's horrible.
Well, I'm just saying it doesn't surprise me that wouldn't be up to scratch or making sure that information got out in, well, not just a timely, but in an immediate manner.
Public servants are the worst people to solve these problems. There's plenty of knowledge about what's gone wrong to use, and there's plenty of lessons from previous royal commissions that still have not been implemented. I would say that money better spent would be actually purchasing equipment that we need and helping the towns that now need help.
Yes, because
which we know how to do. We don't need to be told how to do that.
Well, one of the people are returning now to the bushfire ravaged towns, and they want to stay and rebuild, and they're inviting tourists to come back, help us. And this is the other thing that the social media mob have done. They're saying that every summer is going to be
Rubbish.
like this. Even
Rubbish.
though the last bushfire season in New South Wales, there was the hectares burned was basically 1%
A year ago, we were flooding. We had 3 floods in a year.
That's climate change, though. You know,
you can't win. Like it's not. They've used an event that was predicted from very bad management as an excuse to drive home a political narrative, and that's disingenuous. And the worst thing is that they are not going to learn anything at all from what actually happened, which means we'll be here again in 20 years, 30 years, having the exact same discussion.
The point I was getting to is, do you remember the Kylie Minogue British tourism ad just before New Year? That was sort of a bit of a talking point of
I
the
remember
song.
it was bad.
I actually liked it.
I didn't see it. I just heard that it was bad.
Oh, well, heard. Where did you hear that?
Online. There you go.
So you didn't take your own advice there.
No, I didn't. So yeah, go on with your question.
Yeah, so the comments underneath that were saying, oh, you shouldn't come to Australia because it's on fire. It was basically...
That's a stupid thing to say.
Yeah, but they're basically saying Brits don't come, basically trying to ruin tourism to Australia. And as I said, they're saying that every summer is going to be like this, so you shouldn't go to these towns again because they'll just catch fire next summer.
Well, here's the perfect example. I was promised an apocalypse when I came to Melbourne, and I've arrived here, and it's 25 degrees, it's beautiful weather, blue skies, light breeze, and I was told that it was, you couldn't see, and everyone's in masks, and it was terrible. It's temporary, these apocalypses, and they happen all the time. Australia is always trying to kill you.
I think the masks, it's basically because there is a lot of smoke, because I've been outside when it's smoky, you can smell it, you can see it, but it doesn't make you go into a coughing fit. Obviously, somebody with asthma, maybe it'd have a different effect on them. But
the media is drumming up into something that it's not.
Yeah, and it's a psychological thing as well. They see the smoke, they smell it, and so they cough.
Did you see Zali Steggall posing with her little smoke mask? I mean, we couldn't see our paddocks for 3 weeks, and you didn't see us posing with smoke masks.
Meanwhile, the former member has been, Tony Abbott, fighting the fires since September, including going into a burning house. He's always been the action man. He's been on the fire trucks since then.
Always, and that's not a political ploy.
No.
He actually does that. He will do that regardless of whether he is in politics or not.
Well, since he lost his seat, he doesn't have a job, and he could sit on a corporate board and earn $250,000 a year, but no, he wants to be on the front line helping the community.
And good on him, and I hope he gets a bit more publicity for that, just for the fact that there are politicians out there who do have genuine empathy and do genuinely good things for the community. Good example.
Yeah, he's certainly, I think, setting a better example as a former Prime Minister than Kevin Rudd and Malcolm Turnbull are busy bashing.
Yeah, you don't mention the ghost. He doesn't exist. No one talks about him.
But they're publishing in The Guardian and now Time magazine.
No, well, it's The Guardian, so...
But the point that I'm making is that they think their words will carry more weight than...
No, they have to be... words will always carry weight so long as they are worthy of carrying weight. And that does not come from who says them. It comes from what they actually contain.
I'm not sure if you saw Malcolm Turnbull's Time magazine, but it was basically just a tirade about these climate deniers ruined my government and prime ministers. Basically, it was just him raging and being bitter and basically abusive.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. It doesn't have much of worth or value to add, except for a few amusing rants. He should go on Twitter, be much better suited for him.
Well, his son, if you remember, had before the election quite an active Twitter profile. And I was actually looking at our web stats today. I did an article at the time about Alex Turnbull's his master plan to try and elect independent.
Do you know what he's actually
Liberal.
doing, though? Do you know what Alex Turnbull's doing with Twitter? He's got block lists with 16,000 people on them, and they're circulating them amongst the other high-profile blue-tick accounts because it manipulates the algorithm on Twitter. So if enough blue ticks block you, then you get shadow banned. So they're actually trying to shadow ban en masse, allegedly, conservatives by using this block listing behaviour.
Well, let's have a
You
look.
can see that on his profile.
Let's have a look at some of the more notorious Twitter spammers, as I've heard of them. Imagine just being famous for spamming.
I had a
social
good go
media.
at one that tried to take a bite out of me, and she gave me about 1,500 new followers. So thank you, crazy psycho.
So this is your Twitter profile here. That's got a link to your blog
Yep.
there.
I also link my published articles from there as well.
And this is, we should highlight this tweet here about you talking about the Royal Commission. If you're not going to discuss road management, lack of aircraft, towns without services to protect them, delay in decision making, remote fires to swarm, then just be done with it and organise climate trials, which...
That's because the blue ticks have started talking about putting people on trial for their
Adam Band.
opinions or even their observations. And Aaron Dodd as well. He was one.
He's the one with. Can you explain what's the Twitter drip where they have the drip emoji? What is that?
Okay, so it's meant to represent the water management schemes and mismanagement of water. And so that's what it's supposed to represent. And funnily enough, a lot of conservatives actually agree with the premise behind the drip. But what they actually use it to do is to signify that they're part of the real hard left. So its meaning doesn't actually match what it's used for. It's used as a signal to that you're part of this group. Now, Fu is actually responsible for destroying that. So Fu came up with an idea, this is Marcus Fu from before, that all the conservatives should now put the drip in their title to confuse the left, which is exactly what they have done. So now you'll see conservatives with the drip there as well.
I should bring up, because we're doing...
So you can't even use it was really great to have the blue drip there before because you could tell who you were talking to, and now he's destroyed it. Fu has destroyed our little marker for crazy. He's gotten rid of it now, but he started it and then he got rid of it.
I'll bring up his profile here. So as you say, young conservative, monarchist, writer, opera, liberal, supporter, proud... member of the Institute of Public Affairs, which they've also been blamed for the bushfires.
I'm an IPA member too.
For putting out climate misinformation. Well, IPA, they're sort of a side rage.
They're a think tank.
Yeah. Well, what I'm saying is they're a side rage outlet for the left, but they've mainly been blaming the Murdoch payments, as I call it, Murdoch derangement
They've been trying
syndrome.
to trend the Murdoch hashtag, and it's not doing brilliantly for them. Because people are becoming immune to it. They're sick of it.
One media proprietor who's not far left. And apparently he's able to distort the policy debate in Australia, even though all of his newspapers and Sky News you have to pay for. It's not free.
No, you choose to watch it, unlike the ABC, which sort of picks your pockets on the way through the street and then uses your money for whatever they feel like.
Now we've got 10 minutes left because you've got you're only in Melbourne for a day.
It's a really fast trip.
So I'll go on to this is one of the Twitter spammers. Belinda Jones is her full name. Now she's got 13.k
I have
followers.
her blocked.
You have her blocked?
Yes, because she is one that goes around and is more nasty than and a little bit more predatory than others.
She describes herself as an Aussie mum, grandmother, equalitist, educator, writer, politically aware, photographer, loves cricket.
Yeah, they all say lovely things in their profiles, and then they're horrible to everybody they come across online. That other girl who came after me, Victoria.
Yes, we'll bring.
What was her name?
We'll bring her up. Queen Victoria. She's got the water drip.
Oh yes, the signal.
Victoria Rollison.
She's an identical twin. She has a sister who is just as vile, and she creates lists of conservatives to go, including me, to go out and report to Twitter, not for misusing Twitter, but just for existing on Twitter. And so she attempted to have me blocked and trolled on Twitter, and she lost that one quite badly, I would say.
And she tried to dox you, but did like a poor...
Oh yeah, she tried. Well, this is what I think is very funny about the left. Her idea of doxing me, one was to dig up my old Facebook profile photo, which was a great photo, by the way. And then she contacted my old school to tell them what I was doing online, like my old school cares from the dawn of time what one of their students is doing in the real world at all. But that's a very left mentality of your school will care. Like, no, they don't. Not in the real world. What a weird way to dox someone.
Now, I haven't got it on my list of accounts, but probably one of the biggest Twitter abusers is Professor Marsha Langton, who she did have some good stuff to say in the past about Aboriginal welfare policy, but have you encountered her on Twitter?
Not that I recall. Like, you have to keep in mind, I get attacked by a lot of people a lot of the time. And only if they are particularly humorous or worthy do I decide to sort of string them up and put them out for public display.
She's attacked us because we wrote an article critical of Bruce Pascoe's Dark Emu, which is a whole other topic of discussion, but she targeted another gay conservative a few months back, Tyson James, I think is his name, and she wrote that he probably thinks he's gay because he masturbates too much, and then dug up a Fair Work Commission case where he'd done an unfair dismissal case against his mother and stepfather's business as to discredit him, and it just amazed me that she dug up that she was just so agitated by him to dig that up.
Well, yeah, it's not behaviour that's allowed on Twitter. So, I mean, I'm a libertarian. I'm all for the free and open forum to its extremes. But that is not the platform that we're given to use. And the left, I've noticed, they do all sorts of doxing and targeted harassment, and they never, ever get done for it. And that's something we've been trying to change by actually reporting genuine doxing, like this girl, Queen Victoria, to try and balance the platform up a little bit.
Now, I've got one thing that I missed on my debunking list, and that is the argument that climate change means that it's hotter and drier, the Australian summers, and so there's less time for hazard reduction burns.
This really frustrates me. They say, as you correctly pointed out, that we've got shorter windows. You do, because they used to backburn in winter when it was cool and wet. So you had winter, then you had spring. You had 3 seasons to burn from, and now they're only burning in spring and summer, and so you might only get half a spring because spring can be quite warm and hot. It's too late to burn then. And when you used to backburn in winter, it would burn just the brush. It wouldn't necessarily destroy all the undergrowth or all the tops of the trees, because you have a little bit of water, particularly in swamps where I am. We've got wetlands, and you shouldn't be burning them when it's hot and dry. You should be burning them when they've got the water at the bottom, so they're protected and all the birds protected. And only that, you don't burn in spring because all the little baby animals are in spring. That's the one thing the Greens got correct. You shouldn't burn in spring. It's the wrong thing to do. And so, yes, the windows are shorter, but not because the climate's changed. It's because you're burning at a different time of the year. So it's like a slight falsehood to say that.
Yes, but it's easy just to...
They get away with it too.
Write on Twitter thousands of times.
Doesn't make it true.
Yeah, I know, but... You know the old thing, if you repeat a lie often enough, then people think it's true.
Yeah, although I don't think these bushfires, the one thing they have done is there's enough people now who know what really happened that Twitter is no longer able to propaganda their way out of reality.
And people are so aware of fake news now that they see an article and they're like, that looks a bit dodgy, I might investigate myself.
Well, yeah, as they should be.
People are much more savvy in finding out things for themselves. I know that, for example, I found an article today that said on Good Morning Britain they had a guest who said that children there should be nude art classes for children, and I was like, that sounds like fake news, but I actually dug up the clip from Good Morning Britain. It actually happened. But this is the sort of thing.
The world is very strange, and definitely you can't even trust the fact checkers anymore. You should be looking at things yourself.
Yeah,
and own a bookshelf. With the amount of re-altering of information and Wikipedia editing, I would say definitely keep stuff on real bookshelves.
Yes. You can't Google anything anymore, and certainly don't get your information from Wikipedia. Probably when you get a Wikipedia page, they'll probably promote you as a far-right climate denier.
It'll be set up by Queen Victoria, no doubt. For the record, it's centrist libertarian, not that. But we'll see.
We've got a couple of minutes left. I'll let you have the final say if there's anything I left out that you want to tell our audience.
Oh, only that if you're having trouble negotiating the waters of Twitter, if you really aren't suited for Twitter, you can always turn off. If you want to stay in part of the discussion, don't forget that if the discussion leaves Twitter, it enters the political forum. And so we have to win these battles online while we still can, because the way things are going, if you listen to the rhetoric, politicians and the people behind them are trying to enact more and more censorial legislation across all sorts of topics. So join us with the fight, I would say. Try and keep your patience, stay within the rules if you can, because it's no good to anybody if you get blocked or shadow banned. And just try and balance up the debate a little bit, I think, is the best thing for everyone. That's how these platforms improve.
Well, I'm sure you'll keep at it, and
yes.
Queen Victoria will still be.
She's blocked me now. She got the shits and she left, so I'm gone.
And once again, thank you so much for joining me in the studio. I have Sky News on the television that we have here in the studio a lot, so I'll make sure that I look out for your face on. You've been on Friday Show, Hardgrave, any others?
Not at the moment, those two. And you can catch me in The Spectator or The Penthouse.
Yeah, and I'll provide links to your, well, not just Twitter, but also your blog and other work in the show notes page.
Thank you very much for your time, for having me.
So that's it for this week's show, everyone. Now, next Friday night, Wilmsfront will be the final summer weekly show, and beginning on Monday, January 27th, that's when Wilmsfront will be resuming 3 days a week, but now will be on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Friday nights, 7 p.m. Melbourne time. There'll be no more Sunday night shows, but I am now able to commit 3 weeknights every week on top of Trans-Tasman Talk, which will be back 7 p.m. Melbourne time, Tuesday the 28th of January, and of course the Uncockables every Thursday back at the normal time, 8:30 p.m. Melbourne time. And of course, keep checking out theunshackled.net on a regular basis for all our latest news and commentary, and to follow me on social media and catch the podcast version of the show. You can go to timwilms.com. Thank you for everyone participating in the live chat. I will see you all next week.
Thanks for tuning in to Wilmsfront. Visit timwilms.com or Rational Rise TV to view the archive of episodes. And keep visiting theunshackled.net to view all our shows. And to keep up with the latest real news and analysis.